I'll take just a couple more questions, if I may. May women, any quick questions? I prompt a girl to ask a question. No? Okay.
Hi.
Yes, in the front, and then the gentleman at the back, and then you. Okay. Sorry.
You've talked about illuminating what's going on. When I see in media that 24-hour media that actually is all about celebrity, it's all about not having a debate, it's about Newsnight and where you just shout at people and you don't actually have any discussion. I'm not quite sure. I'm just not sure how we're going to have a debate when we have a media that actually doesn't allow discussion. It's all about how they can make their names for themselves rather than a discussion that helps us as a nation.
Hi, I was going to ask a question really about the history of financial crisis. At the moment, we're all obviously getting very excited because the West has had a financial crisis, but the developing world's had lots of financial crises over the last 30 years. And given that we've actually done the complete opposite of what we advise developing countries to do when they have a financial crisis, will we ever again be able to advise developing countries to raise interest rates, pay back their debt, privatise pretty much every utility, etc., in the future?
Brilliant question.
Hi, Lindsay McGoy. Two brief related questions. The first primarily for Mr. Hutton. The Harvard economist Danny Roderick has proposed the idea of a Tobin tax as a way to curb the volatility of international currency speculation. I was just curious your particular views on that proposal. Secondly, I wanted to ask about the question of political accountability, which hasn't really been touched on that extensively here tonight, and the problem that is generated when those who are currently most poised to raise policy solutions are the very ones that tended to precipitate or preside over the previous and current failures. So we've got Mr. Brown, for example. You touched on the irony of the fact that he is being praised for his handling of the G20 most recent meeting. But as we all know, the G20 has been in existence for over a decade now, and it's been at the helm of a lot of the current problems. So I wonder if we could actually almost rephrase the question that's been posed tonight on how do we avoid political crises in the aftermath of this crisis to how do we avoid those who have precipitated the crises capitalizing from it?
Quick roundup.
I don't know that we avoid them capitalising on it. I think that one of the things that's very striking about the G20 is not only that it's been around for 10 years, but having talked about the world and about everything being globalised, it actually looks a bit like the Congress of Vienna. And, you know, that you have the sort of add-ons of the poorer parts of the world being invited, but really they're pretty marginal. And it's difficult to see how, unless the great powers sustain their will to cooperate, the architecture that they're creating will still exist. You know, if the leaders change, will the will to cooperate and coordinate what they're doing exist in 2 or 3 years' time? Well, hard to tell, really. And I think that's speaks to your point about where developing worlds are and can we preach to them. Well, our policies towards, developing economies have come on since the place that they were in 1944 or 1945, where it was at least recognised for the first time that they could properly develop, that you didn't just have parts of the world that remained rich and parts of the world that remained poor, which is how people understood the world economy before then. But the developed world has been pretty good at preaching, and we haven't. We know that we've had a problem, and other non-governmental organisations working in those parts of the world have been telling us that we've had a problem and how we've been bringing those economies on for at least 30 years. But there's no sign so far, and where we are in our discussions, that we've really modified our policies towards them.
Well, just a point regarding the media. I absolutely understand what seems to be your despair over the declining quality of debate in the big media institutions we have, and it's probably not much comfort to say that it's a lot worse almost everywhere else in Europe. there are still great liberal media institutions in this country, and there is a public service broadcaster which remains a great institution. It remains in some ways accountable, and it's got to be pushed.
BBC.
It's
You've got
yes.
to protect it. You have to actually protect
Yes,
it.
these
However much it irritates you.
the silence that I mentioned in my remarks extends very much to the whole question of public service broadcasting. It's so odd. I've, as Jean said, spent years travelling around the former communist countries of Central and Eastern Europe, discussing and trying to promote and encourage reforms to invent public service broadcasting, which can't really be exported. It's got to be in some way organic, but nevertheless, the regulations can be put in place and so on. And reference is always made to the BBC. We want to be like the BBC, or we're fed up with being told we should be like the BBC. But and here there is this weird neglect of what is a great institution. Still.